Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today we're in a 2023 Mazda 3. Now, on initial glance, this may look like a normal car, but there are a few things that are interesting about this car. Namely, we have a 6-speed manual transmission. It's one of the last regular economy cars that you can still get with 6 forward manual gears, which is very cool. Some specs. This has a 2.5-liter inline 4-cylinder engine producing about 191 horsepower. I've been driving this car for about a week here in Denver, Colorado, and I think this is one of the last enthusiast normal cars for daily drivers. We'll talk about that when we get on the road, but let's go ahead and hop on the road in the Mazda 3 6-speed manual transmission. Before we get started, this video is brought to you by TC European. If you're in the Denver, Colorado area surrounding, or you just want your old BMW worked on, TC Euro is the place to have your BMW worked on. They also have a website, which I'll link in the description down below. They carry all sorts of BMW parts from, well, before 2000. If you don't think the part exists, check their website. They may have had it. They have a lot of hard to source, really interesting parts for you BMW enthusiasts. One of my favorite things about this car is the gauge faces they give you. It kind of looks like an old clock. Really cool, more sort of analog, even though it is a screen. It's pretty peppy for what it is. And I love it when you load up the suspension, you get a lot of feel from this car through the suspension. So right off the rip, why do I think this is one of the last normal sort of enthusiast dailies? The best way I can describe it is from a driver's feedback perspective and generally how the car drives dynamically, the shifter, how everything feels. It feels like a car from the mid-2000s, but with modern tech. You get lane keep assist, really nice sound system, you get Android Auto, all the modern things you would want in a car. But when you're driving this thing around, it feels like a mid-2000s car. It actually feels a lot like Mark V kind of Volkswagen, sort of in that era, or other sedans from around then. Like even, I'd maybe even go as far as to say non-M E9X 3 Series. So it's really cool. Some driver inputs. The shifter, I think, is one of the high points of this driving experience. It's not super direct, but it just has a nice gear engagement, and it's nice to interact with in the driver's seat. It makes driving this car around town really fun, and it's kind of just a nice manual transmission to use. The clutch pedal is pretty light, but it does have, you know, enough feedback there. It's, I would say, adequate. The gas pedal is classic electronic throttle. It's pretty dead in here. It's kind of approaching like Toyota Camry levels of feel. It's not quite there, but I mean, it is a Mazda 3. You don't expect that much out of it. Brake pedal feel is actually really good in this car. If you get on it, it has a good initial bite, and the more you get into it, the more it brakes. It's, for what they are, these brakes are actually very confidence inspiring. I think the one thing I want to drive home with this car is it's a normal car. 191 horsepower. I mean, that's not a large number. And the owner, Tyler, was when I first started driving this car, told me it was really slow, and it is kind of slow, but I come from a 2001 Toyota Camry as a daily driver, so my standard of power in a daily driver is pretty skewed, and I think the torque in this is perfectly adequate when getting up to speed and, well, normal driving conditions. I'll say the amount of new cars I've driven at this point, I've driven a few of them, and a fair amount of manual transmission new cars. I have to say, I think this is my favorite, other than maybe the Civic Type R. I think this is my favorite new car to drive, just to drive around, like normally. It's not particularly interesting. As a car enthusiast, there are things we hate. We hate rev hang. We hate cars that feel super numb. We hate cars with too many nannies and various things. But I think that Mazda here and this Mazda 3 kind of found the perfect blend of modern tech without sort of nannying the driver. Manual transmission is definitely the largest, I guess I would say, symbol of that. But even in the suspension, like you kind of feel still, even through the suspension, the steering wheel, a fair amount of what's going on in the car. The car kind of talks to you. And it does have auto lane keep assist, but it's not overbearing in the driving experience, and it's not constantly kicking on. Now we're getting caught by some rush hour traffic, but it handles pretty well, and confidence inspiring, I think, is the best way to describe this driving experience. It just gives me a level of feedback that makes me feel like, okay, I know what the car's doing, and I kind of know the limit of the car, which we've sort of lost in a lot of modern cars and the technology and everything that's been added to them. So to see that in sort of a normal car is a breath of fresh air. The price on these is pretty good too. They cost about 30 grand. You can get them for even a little bit less with a fair amount of options. And for that price point, there's not a lot else you can really get. It's like this or a Civic Si. And the Civic Si has sort of a sportier heritage. But if you look at the horsepower numbers, it doesn't make that much more than this car. Now, if I had to guess, because I haven't driven a new Civic Si, the new Civic Si is probably a little quicker, probably has a little more top end, but this has more torque, because the Civic Si is a 1.5 liter, this is a 2.5 liter, so a whole extra liter of displacement. You definitely feel it in the torque down low. It has good torque below 3,000, which I do appreciate. It's not crazy fast. I mean, it's really fast even the word he's described this. It's not even quick, but it's kind of fun to rev out, and it sounds a lot like an older 4-cylinder. It sort of winds out as you get into the power band. Oh, there's the lane keep assist. I will say sometimes on these cracks in the road, the lane keep assist kind of likes to send you in different directions, but it's more of a suggestion as opposed to forcing you. BMW is pretty guilty of this, but they sort of really grab the wheel and force it out of your hands. But this doesn't do that, and I like that. I've also noticed when driving around, this car does a pretty good job at kind of guessing what gear you're going to grab. It's not auto rev matching, I would say. You can't just throw it into a gear, but if you kind of blip it in the right direction, the car sort of has a good gauge for guessing how much RPM you're looking for or how little. It kind of just knows what gear you're about to grab, which is cool. Kind of helps since the electronic throttle isn't that precise and it doesn't really give you any feedback. So it helps eliminate some of that guessing game. I think this car is a lot of fun to kind of just drive around. You know, a lot of cars that have tons of horsepower, you can't really stretch the legs anywhere unless you get perfect conditions, open road, or you just get a track. But this thing, even in normal day-to-day driving, you can still kind of toss it around and have fun with it. I will say, even though we're in Colorado right now, which matters because I've been told that in Colorado, a lot of cars' power is produced pretty substantially, sometimes even as much as like 20 or 25% because of the thinner air, you know, more altitude. And it still feels this peppy. So I bet at sea level, it'd be even more so. So, my hot take. This is probably going to be a hot take. One of the most engaging, normal cars to buy as a new daily driver. In a world of modern cars eliminating everything from the driver, this car doesn't. And some people may say that makes it less refined and a worse car, but for a lot of us gearheads, we kind of like something like this. This car was made for us. Now with that, there are some downsides. The car's a little noisier. When driving around at slower speeds, you'll notice a slight little rattle. If you've ever heard the fuel line rattle on Mark 7 Volkswagens, it almost resembles that. Not quite as loud, but it is something to note. But it's a lot of these little things that most car people probably will not care about. Now, if you're a normal consumer, obviously you don't want this thing and you don't want any of those noises, but this car isn't made for you. I don't know, it's kind of a niche car that Mazda made that doesn't make a ton of sense, but for those that it does make sense for, it really makes sense for. So I like it a lot. And with all that, let's go ahead and give the Mazda 3 manual transmission a score.
The score is shown. It scores behind some of the more exciting and more refined hot hatches. The Mazda 3 doesn't excel at anything, but it's a great hot hatch that does everything you want without a hitch. These are a good bargain new and an even better bargain used.